Welcome to Higher Energy, a podcast created by the Association for Comprehensive Energy Psychology. I'm Paula Shaw, your host, and my co-host is Bob Schwartz.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you too. Good to see you too. How you faring here during the old shutdown?
I'm doing very well. I'm very fortunate. Lots to do, lots to working on the garden.
Yeah.
Doing okay.
Good, me too. I've put in a whole new garden that I'm really enjoying, and I'm doing all right too. Thank goodness we've got the internet, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
that's true.
I don't know how people did it when they had that Spanish flu and they couldn't see each other and they had no way to connect, no phones, no anything.
Right.
So I think we're blessed.
Yeah.
And we're also blessed by our guest today.
Good segue.
An extraordinary woman. And I have also interviewed her on my radio show. So I have tremendous respect for Dr. Beverly Rubik. So let me tell our listeners a little bit about Beverly before we bring her on. Dr. Beverly Rubik has had a lifelong interest in frontier areas of science and medicine beyond the mainstream, which is right up our alley here at ACEP. She's internationally renowned for her pioneering work. She earned her PhD in biophysics at the University of California at Berkeley and has since published over 90 scientific papers and 2 books. She has been the director of the Center for Frontier Sciences at Temple University, and she was one of 18 congressionally appointed members of the Program Advisory Board to the Office of Alternative Medicine at the U.S. National Institutes of Health. And currently, she has founded the Institute for Frontier Science, which is a nonprofit research organization. So the lady knows what she's talking about on so many levels. So Dr. Rubik, please join us.
Thank you, Paula and Bob. It's my pleasure to be here with you.
And we are very excited to have you here. There are many things we want to talk to you about today too. And I am going to be uncharacteristically gracious this morning and give the first question to Bob, because he's very excited about this whole 5G thing and what does it actually mean? Is there a connection with COVID-19? We've got lots of big questions for you, Dr. Rubik. Bob, are you there?
Yeah, yep. Sorry, I muted myself because there was noise outside. There was noise outside.
Now that's uncharacteristic for you.
Yeah. So we actually were doing a little pre-gaming. We were talking about what we want to talk about today. So I thought we would just sort of set a stage, and we were talking about the difference between. This way will help us kind of frame our entire conversation, because one of the things I'm hoping to get with Beverly here is that for people to get a real science grounded sense of what's going on, as opposed to there's a lot of stuff out there that's let's say less than the most rational thought. So with that in mind, we were talking about this paradigm shift about the germ theory on the stuff on the outside versus the stuff on the inside, or what was the term you were using, Beverly?
Well, the terrain.
The terrain.
Or the soil of the body,
right.
The milieu in which our cells are.
Perhaps you could just start us off with this little frame of these 2 ideas, and then we'll put everything what we're going to talk about in that frame.
Well, there was a famous debate historically between Louis Pasteur and a contemporary of his known as Béchamp. You don't hear much about Béchamp because he kind of lost the argument. But Pasteur said it's all in the germ. And that became germ theory, which is the dominant paradigm of biology and medicine. In other words, there's stuff out there that's going to get you, like viruses and microbes. And Béchamp said, yes, there may be all these microbes and viruses, but it's all about the terrain, the soil of the body, whether it will support the growth of those germs and viruses. And so the argument went, and but Pasteur, on his deathbed, said he agreed with Béchamp that the terrain was critically important and that the germ was really nothing compared to the terrain, yet the paradigm stuck. It's easier to point the finger at something out there as the problem than to work on yourself. Um, so that's the story. But I think it's both and. We have to consider today holistically both the germ, the viruses, the microbes, etc., that can invade us, as well as the terrain of the body to support the terrain of the body and keep it healthy. And then we can resist infection, or we can, if we get a case of an infection, it can be mild compared to more serious, life-threatening infections.
And what kind of things, Dr. Rubik, are the most important that compromise the terrain?
Well, today we're thinking about environmental factors because we live in seas of chemical poisons, whether it's glyphosate from agriculture, many other polluting things, even plasticizers and the various utensils that we use and uh, that store water, in the case of bottled water. We have also microwaves and now millimeter waves coming with 5G. So we have changed the electrical magnetic environment of the Earth in recent decades.
So there's a lot out there that can make us toxic. And when we're toxic, whether it's 5G or it's bad food or it's too much of alcohol or drugs or whatever, the immune system can't fight the way it would were the soil and the terrain really healthy and strong, right?
Yes, that's definitely part of it. We know, for example, that 5G and 4G, its sister, because 5G requires the intensification of 4G antennas everywhere. There's a lot of research showing how it can disrupt the immune system. In other words, it can diminish our immunity to external things, or it can exacerbate our immune system to what we call a hyperimmune response. When I hear about cytokine storms, which have been associated with serious cases of COVID-19, that's an example of a hyper aggravated immune response.
And what exactly is a cytokine storm?
Well, cytokines are one of those mediator molecules uh, that turn on a full-blown exacerbated immune response. You all know when you have a head cold, it's really the first 3 days you feel sick with a virus, but then your body revs up an immune response, and often your nose is leaking and you're coughing for the next several weeks. That's a little bit of a cytokine storm, but imagine it getting much worse so that the lungs are shutting down or making mucus so thick that it's different than most pneumonias. It's very hard to get rid of that fluid deep in the lungs. So every organ can go into a failure when you have a cytokine storm, especially if you're an older person. And that's it's an hyper-reactive immune response that can be lethal.
You know,
So
Dr.
before,
Rubik,
well,
I'm sorry.
I,
Were
I,
you on
go,
the verge? Go ahead, Bob.
you go.
I was just going to say, before we continue the discussion, we all talk about 5G, but what exactly is 5G? And what's 4G? You know, what's all the G's? What is that?
Okay. Well, first generation, it was the beginning of the internet, etc. And 1G is gone and 2G is essentially gone. We're on 3G and 4G right now, the fourth generation of wireless radiation that gives us the web, that gives us cell phone usage. And 5G is going to require the densification of 4G, more antennas, etc. And the aim is to bring the wireless World Wide Web blanketing the Earth so that every square inch of Earth will be able to receive internet. and that there will be an Internet of Things. In other words, all of the things that you own are going to be hooked up to that Internet and even cross-talking to one another, like your refrigerator and your smart meter in your homes. And also, it gives us the capability of self-driving cars, which are starting to be rolled out in some parts of the world, like South Korea.
So the other thing is, so people, 5G makes it much faster.
Well, they sell it to us on speed, but really, your cell phones are still going to largely work on 4G. The 5G will be more for the
For the robots in the car.
for the robots, for the machines. And I've heard it said, oh yeah, your 3-minute movie will take you 6 seconds or something. But you have to think of risk benefit ratio seriously. So, and at 5G, they are going to use fiber optics with 5G, which means visible light traveling through, imagine glass fibers. And that's perfectly safe. And that's part of 5G. They've strung those fibers, for example, where I live, on the telephone poles. It's a very thick black cable that was strung about a year ago in California. But then they're going to deliver it wirelessly from antennas near those poles into the home. That's the problem. It's the wireless portion that's a problem, because living systems were never evolved or can't adapt really to pulsating digital frequencies. And we're analog beings. We're running on continuous biofield energy. And now we see these pulses of digital ones and zeros of things going on and off dramatically, fluctuating. That's the world of 4G and 5G, and it's going to be blanketing the earth. So there's going to be no place to go if you have health consequences.
So
That's
yeah. So if I say,
yeah.
but some people might be thinking, well, wait a minute. I mean, okay, maybe these maybe AT&T isn't my friend, but they're not dumb enough to roll this stuff out without proving that it's safe, right?
Well, Senator Blumenthal was concerned about safety, and he had a hearing in the Senate, and you can watch some of this online. He asked the industry, what studies have you done to show it's safe? And they said none. They admitted none. And it's really flabbergasting when you think about it. It's such a drastic environmental change. And we have only short-term studies that show there are issues. And then when they're going to blanket the Earth with 42,000 satellites in lower Earth orbit and millions of antennas, and all of this is going to cost many trillions of dollars, well, they're expecting to make a lot of money. That's part of it. And there's some kind of race to do it faster than the Chinese and the Russians. That's part of it. We're used to that kind of competition. Remember the space race or the missile race? So here's another race for world domination in the Internet of Things and robotics and artificial intelligence and surveillance, you might add, because everything hooked up to the Internet will be capable of being watched.
Dr. Rubik, when I was doing a little of my homework, what I found on the internet was it says, many people say there's no reliable evidence that 5G is harmful to humans. In fact, the World Health Organization, American Cancer Society, and the Food and Drug Administration all said, quote, there's no convincing scientific evidence that 5G poses any health risk to humans. What do you say to that?
I'm flabbergasted because I know there are plenty of studies, and most of them not done in the United States, but in Russia and Eastern Europe, and some have been translated to English, that they're very concerned about these things, and even their guidelines for exposure limits are 100 to 1,000 times less than in the United States and Canada.
Wow.
So wait, let's back up a minute. I just want to make sure. So, because you're way more knowledgeable than I am about this. So, is it true that the World Health Organization and the FDA has actually said, we don't seem, there's no research that shows it. They've made these statements.
Well,
No,
actually, the FDA has nothing to say. It's the Food and Drug Administration is outside of their domain.
not that it
The
is. Okay.
federal agency in whose domain it is the FCC, the
Okay.
Federal Communications Commission, and that's a panel of 6 people, but there's no health practitioner on the panel. It's mainly engineers and mainly people from the industry, and they kind of go back and forth between wireless telecom industry and the FCC, and it's only 6 members.
And so,
The WHO
yeah.
um, does have some health practitioners, and they did talk about electro hypersensitivity back in 2011, and then they said some 3 to 6% of the world is electro hypersensitive, and they expected the numbers to grow. They have classified 4G as a class 2B carcinogen, and there's reasons to bump it up to a class 1. There's discussion about that. So WHO, I would say, is aware of the problem in part, but they don't have jurisdiction in the United States per se. And recently, I think they've been defunded, as I recall, by the present administration. So,
So
Dr.
actually,
Rubik,
it's
are
not. They
there,
haven't said what that quote people say. So that's actually not really true. What was just said that they
no,
said.
FDA is irrelevant. They have
But it's yeah, right.
nothing to say.
Right.
It's not a drug. It's not a food. It's not a medicine. It's or a device used in medicine.
So it's
It's
not
the
true.
FCC, and
And they
frankly,
haven't said
what we really need in the U.S. government, and I've said this in other interviews, we need an appropriate organization that would consist of some health practitioners and people from the industry and scientists who study. We need such a panel for the federal government to create to really review the evidence. There is evidence, but it's not being reviewed in the United States. I was flabbergasted when the FCC said, we're going to keep the same standards that we had since 1994. That's a long time ago. They're not going to review evidence since then before to bring out 5G. They're going to stand on evidence that old in science and medicine. You know, I was really flabbergasted that they said the guidelines remain the same. But despite those guidelines, you know, when we start seeing 5G from the various wireless telecoms being installed, be it AT&T or T-Mobile or Verizon or others in the same neighborhood, all of them are concerned only about their antenna, but what about all these things working together? And what about the actual exposure that people are getting? And what are the municipalities doing to assure that the health and welfare of their citizens is guaranteed, that
mhm.
we're not exceeding the guidelines set by the FCC.
And
I
Dr.
found
Rubik,
out in my own city that they weren't doing any measurements. It's written in the wireless telecom ordinance that it should be taken. But when we looked into it more deeply, the city can't send us anything about any measurements. Nothing was done. So the telecom ordinances here and there may not even be enforced appropriately for our health and welfare.
so what kind of things would we be experiencing physiologically as a result of 5G that are not good? What is 5G doing to human organisms? Do we know?
Well, we have to also talk about 4G, and I've studied 4G. 5G is not quite out yet where I live. I don't have a 5G device, but a few years ago I looked at the influence of 4G LTE, that's pretty much the state of the art in smartphones, on 10 adults in a pilot study that was funded by the Weston A. Price Foundation. They are people eating extremely good diets, and so their blood looks very good under the microscope. People have nicely formed red blood cells, clearly separated, not clotting quickly. And I took 10 people from this organization eating very well between ages 20 and 75. And I did a baseline blood test, looking at their blood under the microscope, photographing it, etc. Then they were exposed to a smartphone turned on but not receiving any calls or texts, simply placed in a backpack. And they wore it in my lab while reading a book for 45 minutes. And then I looked at the blood again, and lo and behold, there was a lot of aggregation of the red blood cells. There was evidence of hypercoagulation simply from wearing a 4G cell phone in a backpack for just 45 minutes. And 9 out of 10 people showed such a change. And then I went on to do a little bit more. The same group then used the cell phone for an additional 45 minutes, and I looked at the blood again. And this time the blood looked worse. So elements of hypercoagulation, of sticky red blood cells, and also of malformed red blood cells where there were membrane changes in shape, such that the blood would not flow very well in the smallest microcapillaries. So what would this produce? This would produce symptoms such as brain fog, all the organs are not functioning as well because the blood simply is not flowing and delivering oxygen and taking away waste and bringing in nutrition in the smallest microcapillaries all over the body. And I also looked at toe blood because some will say, well, in one case they're holding the phone in the hand, and to take blood from those fingers, maybe it's only in the hand. So I looked at toe blood. That's as far away as you can get from fingers, and I saw the same thing. And so uh, symptoms of electrosensitivity, though, go beyond that. That's just one thing with circulation. And they include heart palpitations. I myself had a case of this. I had a desktop computer that came with a wireless keyboard and a wireless mouse. It just came that way because we have an infatuation with wireless in this culture. And I didn't think anything of it, but every time I spent too many hours on my computer, my heart starts skipping beats and getting irregular, and I didn't like this feeling. And it occurred to me, maybe I don't have any other wireless here. I have wired internet, and I do use a smartphone in moderation. So I said, well, it could be my keyboard and mouse, but I went and got wired devices, put them in, and lo and behold, my palpitations are gone. So I myself witnessed, and I wouldn't call myself electrosensitive, but I actually think we're all sensitive in some ways. I know that Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt did a study on people who said, I'm not electrosensitive. I can fiddle with my cell phone all day. And he put Faraday cages around their heads and had them uh, do memory tests before and after with the Faraday cage exposed to a cell phone, without the Faraday cage with a cell phone. The Faraday cage would block the rays from a cell phone. And lo and behold, people had better memory recall of a string of digits or words when they had that Faraday cage around their heads. And these are normal people who say, I don't have a problem from my wireless devices. So we may all be affected to some degree. Our neurological functions, people also have headaches, they have sleeplessness, sleep problems. There are a host of problems that can come from exposure and usually overexposure to wireless, even the wireless that we have today. And we can expect that 5G will exacerbate it because there will be more 4G plus now millimeter waves, which have their own and similar health effects on us. So they're not going to take away anything, they're going to add more if 5G is rolled out as planned. And that concerns me as someone who's been measuring these effects and who've seen a fair number of electrosensitive people over the last 10 years.
So I want to make sure I understand something, because this is news to me, and I thought I was relatively aware. But so I had thought that 5G replaces 4G, but now what I'm hearing is no. 4G is there, and 5G adds on and intensifies. So there's no like, okay, well, there's some, you get some more bad things, but you lose some bad things. That's not what it is. It's just
No. Much more, because right now we don't have total world coverage of the wireless World Wide Web.
Yeah.
They want to give it to national parks. When
Yeah.
42,000 satellites go up, and some 60 satellites a week are being launched right now, and you can see them at sundown and sunrise, a thin little line of white dots in the sky. But that's just the beginning of 42,000. Every square inch of Earth is going to be blanketed with more 4G, a lot more, because 4G really penetrates further than 5G frequencies. So they have to rely on it. And 5G operates differently with pencil thin beams that have very concentrated beams of energy. The 4G is more like a broadcast, so the waves spread out evenly from the antennas. But with 5G, it's going to be a pencil beam coming for a microsecond or less to each user from the antennas. And it's going to be all these waves shooting around on and off, and it's the pulsation and the on off aspect of the waves. It's not just the frequency, because living things hate signals that go on off in a random way. For example, if I stand at the light switch and turn it on and off in an irregular pattern, you'll say, stop, stop. Either turn it on or turn it off already. It's bugging me. And that's what we're going to have. We're going to have a barrage of signals, digital frequencies everywhere. It's like we're putting the entire Earth inside a digital computer, and all those frequencies are going to be blasting all life forms. That's the plan.
And will this blasting of this frequency lower our immune systems and make us more vulnerable to viruses like COVID?
Well, there's evidence that that's so from dozens of papers, and you can go to the website www.bioinitiative.org, and there you'll find some tables. Dr. Cindy Sage put together several tables with dozens of papers listed showing effects on the immune system, disruptions, either making it underactive so that we wouldn't have such a strong immune response to microbes in our environment, or overactive, uh, which might produce something like the cytokine storm, which is not healthy either. We don't want any extreme. We want the immune system to function as it should in a normal, natural way. But we're thwarting a lot of things. There's evidence all the way from changes in the genome, changes in gene expression, all the way up through cellular and hormonal changes, all the way up to performance and behavioral changes, because it also affects the nervous system.
Yeah.
So across all the levels of organization and biology, there are effects. So the immune system is just one of those levels, whether it's cellular or humoral with antibodies, or at the level of the whole immune response.
So
So what
I
can we do? I'm just,
well,
sorry, Bob. I got to ask this because I'm on the edge of my seat. What can we do to protect ourselves? Or is there anything we can do?
Well, right now, the 5G has not been totally implemented. There are regions of the world where it has been totally implemented. And interestingly, one of those is the city of Wuhan, China, where,
okay.
of course, the pandemic
Wow.
began. And that made a lot of people wonder. And we also noticed the first several strong regions where COVID was coming as a pandemic were also areas in which 5G had been at least partly implemented. It made people wonder. For example, South Korea. South Korea already has self-driving cars and a lot of 5G, which involves the enhancement of 4G. Northern Italy had also a lot of rollout, as did Iran. These were some of the first areas that were the strongest hit. And
Mhm.
areas that were not strongly hit, also highly populated, were India. For example, India and Africa. Only later on did they seem to get cases. Um, and in the United States, I noticed that Silicon Valley was hit in the San Francisco Bay Area hardest. That's where we have some 5G. Southern California and also New York City. Those are among the areas with the most COVID cases. But then again, it's really hard to trust the numbers because the testing has not been the best protocols. So there are issues with trying to make correlations. There's a very interesting paper It was done by Spanish researchers, and there's a translation to English found on the internet if you can find it. It's very hard to find material that may involve anything about 5G that might be a cofactor involved in this pandemic. It's been literally censored from social media and from Google, YouTube, and Facebook. But there is a scholarly paper done by Spanish researchers, also where there was a lot of cases in Spain, and they took a very careful look at the incidence of cases of COVID-19 in various regions throughout the world about 2 months into the pandemic. And they found a very strong correlation, even where parts of cities, let's say one region had the 5G partial rollout and other regions had absolutely no 5G. And they found more COVID-19 cases in the regions of cities where there was 5G rollout and virtually absent in the regions of cities without 5G implemented. And they conclude that this is not far bigger than chance, that 5G appears to be a causal factor in the pandemic. This is not to say that 5G is causing it. It would be a mistake. There is a virus, I'm convinced. There is evidence for a virus, good evidence. There's testing, there's people have sequenced it, they understand more about it as time goes on. But when it comes to infection cases, it seems to be most prevalent in regions where 5G has been at least partially rolled out. And that's an important thing to take into consideration as an environmental cofactor.
So the idea would be that somehow the 5G has compromised the ground, the immune system, the terrain, and therefore makes it harder for the person to fight off the influence of a virus.
Yes, and I would add that the 5G, I mean, some of the cases of COVID are so mild that people don't even know they had COVID. So they may not have had a test, but if 5G exacerbates some of the clotting, the hyper coagulation, because that's what 4G and 5G do. They affect the blood. And this virus also, in part, targets the blood, so that symptomatically people may feel it more, maybe getting a stronger response to the COVID by virtue of the 5G.
And so, again, please tell me, what can we do on an everyday basis? Are we just at the mercy of this stuff being bombarded at us? Is there something we can do within our own homes to make ourselves safer? I know you told me, Dr. Rubik, when you were on my radio show, to unplug my modem and put my phone on airplane mode, which I do every night, and I sleep so much better. But is that actually helping me with 5G? Or would it?
Well, the doses of wireless radiation are cumulative. We have to think about them like getting an X-ray or ultraviolet light. You wouldn't go out and get tanned all the time. It's just not healthy to get more and more exposure to UV, and you might get skin cancer. So yes, we need to consider our dose. And it's a very good idea to continue to keep your phone on airplane mode when you're not using it, and to look at it periodically, turn it on and see, oh, who texted or called me, and then call them back. But not to keep it on, and especially wearing it on the body. This is the worst situation. People tuck that cell phone in a pocket or even in their bras. Very dangerous. Or they hold it constantly in their hand, and not holding it to the head for phone calls is another good idea. Getting an air tube headset so that you're actually not having any electricity going into your brain, but actually piping the sound into your ears. It's called air tube, as I recall, is a good way to use it on speakerphone. And remember, despite all this stuff going out there with antennas and with satellites, still, I calculated that the biggest exposure that you're going to get is in your own home, from your own phone and other appliances, from your smart meter, from if you were to buy these 5G appliances of the toaster and the refrigerator and all these things that are going to hook up to the internet, frankly, I would say just don't buy those things. Get simpler things that don't contribute to the Internet of Things. You can control your home environment, and that's important, that you can regulate how many minutes you and your loved ones are spending on wireless devices. And go back to getting Ethernet DSL. That's what I use. And by the way, it's far more secure. It can't be hacked like wireless. Somebody can hack into your bank accounts. If you've got everything on wireless networks, you're at the mercy of hackers. Wired is far safer. So we want wires. That should be our mantra. Let's demand 5G with fiber optics all the way to the home. That's not installed yet in most American cities. Let's go to our cities, our city planning commissions and city councils and say, we want a telecom wireless ordinance that says, give us wires, give us 5G with fiber optics
And that
instead of
would be,
wireless. And that will rule out the self-driving cars, but then we have to ask, who really needs this? It's going to put all the taxi and Uber drivers out of work.
that's right. What about electric cars or hybrids? Are they dangerous because of the exposure to
Well,
the wireless?
they're not just electric anymore. I had a client who came in. He was almost 90 years old, and he had a Bluetooth hearing aid, and he was very proud that his cell phone turned on and off his Tesla car. Okay? So it's not just about the battery in the car. All of that is not great either. We've measured that. It's not wireless fields, but then add to it, oh, your cell phone activates a lot of cool stuff inside the car,
Yeah.
and it activated his hearing aid. He can control the volume of his hearing aid through a cell phone. But here's a man who had a lot of blood problems, and he came to see me. He had hypercoagulation. And I had to say, sir, we have to think about the wireless world in which you've embedded yourself.
Mm.
It needs to be reconsidered. And there are other hearing aids that don't operate on Bluetooth. So
So
all these
just
Bluetooth add-ons that people wear to monitor their exercise level, that's another way that we're getting wireless. It's not as strong as a cell phone, but we should reconsider whether we're wearing these things all the time. I found a device that keeps you upright because many people hunch over the computer. And then I was going to get one until I read, but it's wirelessly communicating with your stuff, telling you if your back is upright. I just don't need it. I'm going to have to use some other biofeedback measure of keeping my back straight at the computer.
so
And another
Bluetooth.
thing is
Yeah,
getting rid of DECT phones, the digitally enhanced wireless phones in the home. Go back to wires. You might have to go to an antique shop or an estate sale, but they're safer than this wireless landline phone that people use, which,
Mm.
by the way, has stronger emission even than a smartphone, and it's always blasting you because the even if you think it's turned off, you're not using it, the um, the phone is still blasting you with wireless radiation. We've measured all of those. They're all giving us more toxic waves. So there's a lot we can do to reduce ourselves. My laboratory is working on ways of mitigating maybe the wireless from our essential apparatus like cell phones. We've been working toward getting the funding to compare, say, the top 10 products out there to see what really works. Because a lot of them, people sell a little sticker you stick on the backside of your phone, or a pendant that you wear on your neck, and they say, hey, I'm protected. I can do this all day. I don't think so. The study didn't test them all day. And
Mm.
show me the study. Was it published by independent scientists in a peer-reviewed journal? Hardly anything is. There's a lot of hearsay on internet websites selling purportedly protective products, but we need to move beyond and really have independent studies on these things. And that's one thing I'm working on.
you know, we could talk all day, but I'm mindful of how long it's been. I mean, it's gone
Yes.
by in a second. Uh, I'm just thinking we should find a way to wrap this up.
Well, I would like to say one more thing, and
Sure.
that is, the lack of permission for critical thinking in our society today is really disturbing me. The fact that this is one of the few interviews I've had really addressing the bigger issue of this pandemic, 5G, and the COVID. But as I said, Google and the social media are censoring these things, and we really should have again another federal panel looking at all the factors involved in this pandemic, really worldwide panels. This is something the WHO should really do, but of course I think the WHO is really under um, power of private industry now, with Bill Gates being the largest contributor. It's not clear politically where they're aligned, but we need critical thinking brought to this pandemic. How we can reduce our risks at all levels, exposure to the virus with whether it's a mask or social distancing, and relieving ourselves from the extra burden of 4G, 5G at this critical time. If I were a leader in this society, I would say, let's put a moratorium on this. Let's watch Wuhan. Let's watch a few regions like South Korea where the rollout has happened. Let's see what happens there before we march onward blindly, installing all these satellites and infrastructure that will cost a fortune that we may have to undo because people will not be healthy.
And seriously, Beverly, is there anything we can do? I mean, is this a right to your congressman kind of an issue?
There
Can,
are definitely
can we stop it?
websites, and the rollout is different in every city, and it seems that municipalities have the wireless telecom ordinances, so you have to work with your cities, and
Ah,
every city is different. There are a number of cities who have put flat down, it's not going to happen in this town. I heard about some towns in Connecticut, I don't remember the names now, that said the city council voted against 5G and they won't install it there.
okay.
Now, the federal government may mandate them to install it. There's certain laws on the books, and FCC making executive orders. I don't know if FCC has any power to make executive orders, but people wonder. So some cities have sued the federal government because they say you're taking away our jurisdiction of health and welfare of our own people by mandating a fast rollout. And I don't know the status of those lawsuits. I can imagine they'll be dragged out for a long time. But other cities are going along with it, and I understand there's a lot of money flowing under the table from wireless telecom to some of these city executives who then go along with the rollout. It's amazing to me how a panel of 6 people who have no knowledge of health and medicine think they can regulate the United States when it comes to wireless
Hmm.
radiation when they have no understanding or knowledge of it, and there's nobody informing them about all the other studies. Something is radically wrong here, and we need change at the top. That's for sure.
Is just one final question. Is anything happening in Europe or elsewhere that because I mean you just mentioned Korea, they're going headlong into it. So I mean, if it's as bad as you say, and I'm just playing devil's advocate, then why isn't somebody somewhere, maybe Sweden or Denmark or
Well, actually,
somebody?
Brussels, the mayor of Brussels, you can find this online. She makes a video saying, no 5G here. We've reviewed the evidence. It doesn't look healthy. We
Yeah,
put on a moratorium. And cantons in Switzerland, ditto. Parts of Italy, I think some sections of
nothing,
Rome said
nothing, nothing nationally, which is fascinating. I mean, and again, I'm
no.
a couple of
Uh,
years
s-
here
s-
and there.
no,
Not
I haven't heard of any nation. Slovenia said limited rollout, but again, I've looked at this. I haven't seen
yeah,
any nation say no rollout, but we have to be concerned about all the satellites because it will blanket the Earth, and then there's possibly changes in the ionosphere into the energetics of the Earth itself that we didn't even talk about. Besides blasting us with energy, what is it going to do to we depend on that chi or that prana between the earth and the sky. We're the critters between earth and heaven, as it's said in Oriental medicine. We start fooling around with the ionosphere by 42,000 emitters. of digital frequencies. What are we doing? Terraforming the Earth into a digital electromagnetic planet. I don't know. Nobody's ever done that experiment. And how do you even test for its safety? To me,
Yeah.
it's like we're shooting ourselves in the foot by that kind of coverage. And people need to get to Elon Musk because it's mainly SpaceX, his company, that's the largest installer of these satellites. Also, Amazon is another installer and another company called OneWeb. And there may be others, but SpaceX, Elon Musk's company, and his satellites are called Starlink. You can go and watch the videos of these things already showing up in the sky.
Mm. Well, Dr. Rubik, I'm so glad that you were our guest today. I can only hope that this show starts opening up a lot of conversations because obviously this is a very serious time on the planet and we all need to do whatever we can to keep ourselves safe and keep our planet safe. So thank you so much for everything that you taught us today and all the great information. And whew, we definitely have to have you back because we could carry on for another hour, I know.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. And, you know, I hope we can really contribute to educating people so that we can stop this madness.
Yes.
Because I think it's the plan for the total enveloping of the Earth in such frequencies is very poorly conceived, certainly not studied. And we need,
Certainly sounds like the beginning of a really bad or good science fiction thing that doesn't
yes.
that does not end well.
Well, that's right. It sounds like we're living through science fiction. And some days
Yeah,
I feel that way.
yeah,
Indeed.
yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Rubik. This was
You're
great.
welcome.
Bye.
All right,
Bye bye.
everybody. So good to see you all. We'll see you again soon.